for me, creativity is really an important enabler for innovation. And that comes at the forefront of any company trying to be innovative. And it's got a lot to do with how people think in terms of their ideas, in terms of defining the problems, and then obviously solving those problems.
Okay. And I know that you've experience of working in many different kinds of cultures. What do you think are the differences in terms of the Eastern approach to creativity compared with the Western approach?
I think I've been spending the last 1 year specifically in emerging countries and developing economies. And what I see in this part of the world in terms of creativity is I still find that it's an alien concept and people are still opening up to it. I think if I compare it with the Western cultures, I think the concepts of creativity and innovation are much more established in terms of models. I find here, though, that this concept of creativity in emerging countries is something that is new, but something that could be a great competitive advantage for organizations working in this part of the world.
Is that just to do with the way we use language to speak about creativity and innovation?
That's a great question. And I think definitely there is something to do in terms of interpreting the word creativity as well. But I guess in the emerging economies, I find the cultures, without at the risk of generalizing it, are mostly top-down driven here, more hierarchical, and therefore creativity is, almost crushed in many of the organizations that I have worked with. And these are typically organizations which are either local organizations or family-owned businesses.
Very often, in terms of business, people will create a business to fulfill an existing need. For example, the need for food, the need for accommodation, the need for education. Whereas entrepreneurial thinking, very often it seeks to fill a gap where the need may not be so visible. It's not just to do with food, accommodation, food, shelter, and education, for example. So can you think of some examples of creativity that's being expressed to fulfill some of these more intangible needs?
Well, one example that comes to mind is one of customer service. And if I be more specific, especially in the banking sector, customer service for companies for a long time. But it's just that nobody's done much about it yet. And if I look at, some of the countries that I get to work in the emerging part of the world, for them to do something about it, there is a tendency to actually jump from problem identification to actually solution. So not enough time actually spent defining more creatively what those problems are and synthesizing those issues. I think there's a tendency for people to be more action oriented and come up with short-term fixes.
Yes, I think that's an excellent example that you've given about customer service, because very often that's an intangible need. It's not something that a small business may focus, they're just focused on supplying the tangible goods rather than all this intangible.
Absolutely. And just to kind of add to what I said, Jasveer, I find that, in this part of the world, there is enough opportunity for companies to do something more creatively about the known problems rather than even going to the unknown ones. I think there's an opportunity for companies to really have a competitive advantage if they could fix, areas such as customer service. And quite frankly, I gave you the example of banking, but that customer service, that vertical actually applies across many different industry segments.
Yes, and also when we think about examples such as Facebook, for example, that was a response to a need that maybe didn't exist 100 years ago, because 100 years ago people tended to be in contact with the people that they wanted to have relationships with in their local environment, whereas nowadays with globalization, families are dispersed all over the world, and therefore there is this need which didn't exist previously, and organizations, social media, they were able to identify this need and create something to serve that need, which people didn't, know they even, it was a need that people were not aware of until Facebook arrived. And it's like, then they realized that it was a great way to stay in touch with people and to build relationships with people that were unknown to them.
And if you allow me to give you another example, another sector I work quite a lot in is the telecom sector. And technology has been a kind of a big challenge. Things like WhatsApp, for example, they've completely disrupted the telecom industry, as you know. So now this, clients that I work in the telecom industry as well, they're coming up with more creative ways, more innovative ways to actually come up with solutions for their consumers, which requires a lot of creativity. Excellent question. And a very critical question when I meet with CEOs, this is a key question that comes up. And you really, what we're talking about here is companies and CEOs to start with, is actually challenging their mental models as opposed to business models. And part of that really is around, few process skills that we teach, the leadership team and then their teams, and, has to go across the organization for real creativity to come about. And those process skills are really fundamentally around, being more open-minded, not judging people, being less opinionated when it comes to defining the problem, and also, involving the team and really deferring judgment. That is one of the key skills that we teach people, because what happens in a lot of instances is that we kill creativity, we kill innovation even before it starts, because people start judging one another. So we put a lot of emphasis on actually, enabling creativity through focus on process skills and through focus on, teams working together and being more open-minded to listen to one another, active listening.
Okay. And do you think it's because you talked about the hierarchical structure and where there is like a deep level of hierarchy compared with grassroots. So do you think that the way creativity is expressed needs to be seen very differently based on whether we're talking about grassroots creativity or creativity at the top of the hierarchical structure?
Absolutely. And the example I'll give you thereof is another client that I've recently worked with, and they were doing this strategic planning, and they're a retail client. And so, part of their intelligence now that they're gathering is basically through POS, right? People at the point of sales, which are obviously the closest contact you will have to a customer. So this time around, when they're coming up to create their strategic plan, they're actually doing a bottom-up approach as well, as opposed to just top-down, to actually break the hierarchical way they had been doing it. And I think if you're looking in terms of solutions and really trying to leverage, the horsepower that we have from everyone, is really great facilitation, right? And making sure that everybody gets an opportunity to view their experiences, share their experiences, because that's certainly the way we do it here in this part of the world, by involving everyone regardless of their rank.
Do you? Is that right? You involve everyone actively regardless of their rank?
Absolutely. I mean, this is it's a little bit like we have to live what we preach. And really what we preach is to be open-minded. I think the most important thing, we use three words. We call it the language of innovation, which actually those three magic words are how might we. And it's basically changing any problem, which could be, stated in a negative way. And you start every problem with these three magic words. And it has a profound impact in how people start opening up. And they suddenly start seeing options that they couldn't see in the past.
Yes, what I love about what you've just said is that you begin with a question, how, rather than an answer.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And we find people in this part of the world, and I think some of it also is to do with the way the performance management system works in companies, right? So performance management system, in my experience, is really rewards people for taking action, right? Timely action, as opposed to thinking. So thinking is a much underplayed skill, I feel, in the emerging part of the world. And it is not well incentivized. Now, that doesn't mean you start bringing only thinkers in the company. Obviously, you need all kinds of skills. But I think there is a lot of opportunity for companies to be encouraging thinking, encouraging ideas, and encouraging people to bring forward even problems, because problems, as Jack Ma says it, challenges are opportunities.
And, there's also this question of how do we disseminate these ideas? How do we share these ideas so that we're not just working in a silo?
Absolutely. That's the magic word. In fact, I work with so many clients, and I used to use the word silo, right? A functional silo. Finance only thinking about finance, sales only thinking about sales. And one of the CEOs I worked with actually said, you know what, it's not silos, it's cyclones. So it's like every function is so deeply into their own thing. And again, that goes back to, I think one reason is, again, it goes back to how people are incentivized in the performance management system. Because from my experience, I often find, the KPIs, the key performance indicators, are actually often conflicting. So a supply chain might have a KPI to reduce the stock. The sales might have a KPI to sell more, while the sales people are not going to be able to sell more if they have less stock. So I think, again, one of the reasons is performance management. But more than that, I think it's the leadership behavior and, what's the leadership team promoting good behaviors to, which is to break the silos and do what's right for the customer. And customers, you have external customers, but you also have internal customers.
Right. And everyone is interconnected, right?
Absolutely. Part of a value chain.
Yes. And thinking about creativity, because this conference is for academics, entrepreneurs, and educators, and I find that each of these cultures remain in their own silos, where the entrepreneurs are thinking about ways to increase profitability, like what can they create that will add value, whereas the academics tend to not be concerned as much with the practical application of the research, but it's more about discovering the truth. But you see, a lot of entrepreneurs don't have access to academic knowledge. In order to have access to academic knowledge, we need to be positioned within academia. Do you think that is a limitation? Is that a disadvantage for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because, in my experience of working with entrepreneurs, I think benefit a lot from the great work that, academia has done. But I think conferences such as the one that you're facilitating is a great forum for the entrepreneurs to be working much more closely with the consultants, with the academic people. I think it's really a case of having a better understanding that each of these stakeholders has a position in the value chain, right? And unless that value chain is tight and there is good transfer of knowledge and you're open to learning, unless that is the reality, I think nobody can succeed. And if they do work together, then the cake of the size can be increased, right? And everybody has a bigger slice to eat. I would like to quote one of my favorite quotations to one of your earlier questions about some of the challenges that come in the way of creativity. And one of the favorite quotations is from Einstein, who said, and it's a mathematical equation, I'm an engineer, my first qualification, so I like numbers and equations. And that equation is that learning is equal to 1 divided by ego. So less the ego, more the learning. And if I have the ego, less the learning. So I think sometimes I also find ego or egos, come in the way of learning.
Yes, that is so true, because in business, especially when somebody's just starting up, I find that they are trying so hard to distinguish themselves from others, to identify their own unique selling point, that they become egotistical in promoting themselves above others, rather than promoting themselves, positioning themselves in collaboration with others.
Absolutely. And another thing, if you'd like me to add here, when it comes to entrepreneurs and startups, I think, we define innovation as 4 things that need to happen. And I think I find sometimes that entrepreneurs are very good at the idea stage, which is, the problem, what's the problem, which we call in our language, generation, right? So generation of challenges or generation of opportunities. And then the next step we define is conceptualization, right? Which is piecing it all together, connecting the dots. And then the next piece is around optimizing. So you might have, 10 different ideas, but which are the best ones? You might want to implement 1 or 2. So what's the process you use to narrow down and converge? And finally, implementation, right? Which is actually getting things done. And I find that startups or entrepreneurs typically would be more fixated with the idea stage. Oh, I've got the great idea. But it's not unless they go through the circle and they spend enough time on each stage that their idea or their product or service is going to really be adding value, and the business, really taking off. So, and for that, there are different ways. That's where, to your earlier question, they have to surround themselves with people like academics. So if there's anything that's missing in this circular process, they're able to leverage that, or surround themselves with other people apart from themselves who can bring those complementary skills. I think if I had to just say one thing in terms of creativity, I would say it's about the ability to not judge other people, other ideas too quickly, and keeping a very open mind. I think that is probably where the crux would be. It starts with that.